Next, we're going to hear from another physician. He is Oahu-based, Cliff Otto, and he's an ophthalmologist. And you can see his bio on our sheet here. He's a retina specialist at the Retina Institute of Hawaii. And move aside while they set up his thing. He was a general ophthalmologist in the U.S. Army in Japan. He's worked as a natural products chemist at UH and as a reference standard chemist at Wyeth Hurst, how do you say it? Pharmaceuticals. And he is a newbie in the legislative process in Hawaii, and he underwent his ordeal by fire, birth by fire, what's it called? Last session. I think he went in naive and came out smarter and perhaps more cynical. But anyway, we'll let him tell the story himself. Dr. Otto.
Thanks, Pam. I'd like to thank Drug Policy Forum of Hawaii, first of all, and the other sponsors for inviting me to talk to you today. It's an honor to be able to talk about a topic that I feel rather passionate about. And I've got lots of slides, but I'm going to fly through them. Just sit back and try and absorb some of the general concepts. I'm not going to go into any hard science, and I'm going to try and make a point for research here in Hawaii. Pam mentioned some of my background just to give you a kind of a perspective on where I'm coming from with my background in natural products isolation with naturally occurring products here in Hawaii, doing some chemistry at Wyeth Hurst in the New York area before going to medical school, and currently a retina specialist. So I have a normal day job. This is my hobby that consumes a lot of my time, but it's something that I feel it needs to be done. The way that I got into this originally was because of a family friend who was diagnosed with stage 3 colorectal cancer back in July of 2009. He had used tobacco and cannabis occasionally, recreationally for the past 40 years, and came to us and said, well, I've been having some bloody stools for the past 5 years. What should I do? We got him to a doctor. He was diagnosed through a biopsy first. Stage 3 basically means that it's almost to the point where it's spreading through your entire body. It's gone through the wall of the intestine, affecting some of the local lymph nodes, but still something that can be managed with chemotherapy before surgery to reduce the size of the tumors, surgical excision with removal of the local lymph nodes, and then post-surgical chemotherapy as well to reduce the risk of recurrence. The main side effects, as you know, from chemotherapy are nausea, decreased appetite, and nerve damage from the chemotherapy agents themselves. So as a direct result, you get weight loss, decreased immune function that sets you up for opportunistic infections like pneumonia, and then painful paresthesia. So basically means tingling in your nerves that's so bad that it becomes painful. And cannabis has been recognized. That's probably one of its first recognized indication is for these three: nausea reduction, appetite stimulation, and pain relief. So that kind of overlapped with some of my medical knowledge. That was my first experience with somebody using cannabis and receiving that kind of relief. And the first thing that I did, being a medical scientist, was to start Googling and looking in my medical literature. This is just an example of a couple of the articles that came up. Use in aggressive breast cancers, uses in human glioma cell lines. You can read those titles for yourself, but the use is quite extensive. And these are all peer-reviewed studies done in animal models, and some of them in human studies as well. This just gives you an idea of how the research has been progressing over the past several years, and it's just taking off exponentially as more labs are getting into the hard science and working out the mechanisms for how these substances are working. This is one excellent review that goes into the treatment of pain. Ethan Russo is the medical advisor for GW Pharmaceuticals, the makers of Sativex. And he's very knowledgeable in the subject, has written extensively. But that would be one resource that talks about its use in treating pain. What I also did, just for the hell of it, was to Google in cannabis and patents. And I came up with this interesting one. by the Department of Human and Health Services. They've actually patented the use of cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants. So they're lining up all the patents for the things that are patentable for that time when they can cash in on it. Let me see if I can give you the year. What does that say, I can't read that, 2003? So fairly recent. And there are a whole bunch of others. You could just Google that and you'll get hundreds of patents, a fair number of them by departments of the US government. And then, you know, you Google things and you come up with this on our National Cancer Institute website on March 17th, 2011. You read that little box in red, they specifically say possible direct anti-tumor effects. Well, that was until NIDA found out about this, and they pulled it 2 weeks later and changed the entire wording. Kind of a curious course of events. But this was my introduction to the use of medical cannabis. Of course, the bad boy here is THC. I'm not going to, you know, don't freak out with the carbon structure and everything. I'm not going to go into biochemistry. But it's a very simple molecule and has wide-ranging effects because of its stimulation on the cannabinoid receptors. And Charlie mentioned there are at least two. They now think there's a third one. And there are receptors throughout the entire central nervous system and the immune cells. But curiously enough, very low population within the brainstem, which means no suppression of respiration. That's why you don't die from it. You can smoke as much as you want or inhale or intake as much as you want, and you'll pass out before anything else happens. And you're not going to stop stop breathing in your sleep. As Charlie mentioned, there is Marinol, and I started looking at, well, if I wanted to prescribe cannabis to my patients, how could I do it? Well, I could write a prescription for dronabinol, which is the U.S. adopted name for THC, so that they could turn it into this pharmaceutical product. And it went from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 in '86, then Schedule 2 to Schedule 3 in '99, after a petition from Unimed, which is the maker of this product. Schedule 2 means that I could, being that I have a DEA license to write for medication Schedule 2 through 5, I could write a prescription for dronabinol at that time, and that prescription could be taken to a pharmacy. The only thing is you can't refill it. So every time the patient needs it, I have to write a new one. Schedule 3 means you don't need to write it every time. You can write refill 3 times, and the patient can refill it without coming back to you. That's a difference between 2 and 3. Marinol comes in different strengths, and as Charlie mentioned, it's very difficult to titrate when you're taking it orally, and the effects are sometimes very unpredictable and very unpleasant. This is that site that Charlie was also mentioning. I came across that completely by accident, and this is a little cut and paste directly from their website. Medical marijuana already exists. It's called Marinol. Very curious approach. So let's move on to the University of Mississippi School of Pharmacy. These are the guys who are manufacturing the government's supply of medical cannabis. Dr. El Soli holds actually I discovered there might be one other contractor who's doing some non-supply of medical cannabis, but he is the primary supplier of all the cannabis that's being grown he holds several patents. One of them is for a suppository that he felt would be good for patients who could not ingest or smoke and may actually have some good medical benefit. But he's partnering up with these 2 companies because they're going to start making an extract for the Marinol. The DEA is going to change things a little bit so that you could actually extract the THC from the plant, purify it, and then that will become Marinol. And they're also working on these suppositories. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to do it, but I thought it was kind of a funny picture I got off the website. This is a list of the remaining patients in the federal Compassionate IND program. 4 of them are still alive. The program, as you may know, is closed in 1992 when there were so many applications from AIDS patients that they just cut it off and said, we're not going to do it anymore. Elvi Musica is one of those 4. She's been getting her medical cannabis from the government for her glaucoma. And this is a picture of the tin that she receives every month. And the federal government decided that she needs 300 cigarettes a month, 10 a day. Maybe that's because of the quality of the product that she's receiving. This comes from the University of Mississippi. I found this on their website. It's one of their recent memorandums from, what does that say? I think it was back in July of 2000, yes, July 2010. And I'd like you to focus on number 8. This is a grant that Dr. El Soli received from NIDA and the NIH. And I blew it up on the bottom. The title of the grant is Production, Analysis, and Distribution of Cannabis, Marijuana, Cigarettes, and Related Materials. So what's happening is they are working out a distribution system for medical cannabis, and it seems to be suggesting that the federal government has a plan to do distribution at some point. They're not quite sure how to do it yet, how to resolve all these conflicts between all the different agencies. But it's something that they're working at because it doesn't say distribution of Marinol, distribution of cannabis and marijuana cigarettes. Here is a picture of Sativex that we talked about before. And what's interesting about Sativex is that they're doing a 1-to-1 ratio of THC and CBD. CBD is the second most prevalent chemical in cannabis. And in my opinion, has a lot more of the interesting medical properties, anti-inflammatory, neuroprotective, anti-cancer. So they basically, as Charlie mentioned, they made a hash oil extract that is currently going through phase 3 clinical trials in the USA for cancer pain. It's probably not going to be indicated for anything other than cancer pain. The distributor said they're not interested in getting involved in that. So now let's move on to Hawaii's program. And I'm not going to go into the details at all, but thank you to Governor Ben Sayetano for signing this into law, actually not too long ago, 11 years ago. So that's where that started. But by reviewing the program, my 2 conclusions are, first of all, there's no safe source of state-sanctioned medicine, as everybody knows. And the greatest risk to the program is, greatest risk to the patient is the program itself. So after doing all of this preliminary research, I was wondering, why can't we do research on this botanical medicine that's been legal in Hawaii for the past 11 years? It was a rather naive question. And I was very lucky to meet up with Jeannie and Pam, who guided me along the way to our state capitol. And I had the pleasure of meeting with Senator Sparrow, and we formulated SB 113, which was introduced by Senator Sparrow into the Senate, made it all the way through the Senate committees, and never even got a hearing in the House. The idea was, I thought we'll work with existing state law and create a kind of a dispensary that would function as a research facility. It would become the caregiver for all the study patients, grow their allowed amount. There would be no exchange of money and there would be no surplus. And the facility would grow the study material and then distribute that to the patients. So with that in mind, let me quickly go over 5 barriers that I've discovered. How am I doing on Pam? Pam on time? Okay. So number 1 is the FDA. Their entire approval process is what's holding this whole thing down. You first have to get all protocols approved by them. You have to have an institutional review board, which can be local or national, to review the ethics. And then it's got to go to the DEA. They've got to approve it. If it's approved, you get licenses. And NIDA will supply the material. You can only use NIDA's material for any studies that will be conducted. You got to do preclinical animal studies and go through the full phase 1 through 3. The FDA even issued a guidance for the industry And there's this process that they set up where you first have to identify if it's a food, a dietary supplement, and if it's a botanical drug, it fits into two categories. Either it can be approved through an over-the-counter monograph, which I'm not going to get into, but may be a way of avoiding this whole FDA new drug application process. Depends on the randomized clinical model, which I think for cannabis is not appropriate and requires a placebo. Placebo for cannabis is a whole other topic unto itself. It is something that's possible, and you wonder how could you use placebo for cannabis when patients would probably be able to tell if they're getting the psychoactive effects or not. But there are ways to extract the chemicals, and some patients will get a little bit of a feeling just from inhaling and holding their breath that makes them think that they've gotten something. So there is a way to do placebo for cannabis, but as I said, maybe not necessary, because there is the option of doing an OPEL label crossover study where you give patients different ratios of THC to CBD strains and change the medicine every month and then see how their symptoms and how their objective findings are changing. So this has led me to further questions of, well, Hawaii does not recognize federal law when it comes to medical cannabis. Why should we have to go through this whole federal process for research? Barrier number 2, the Department of Public Safety. What strikes me is the direct conflict of interests that exists in a enforcement agency controlling a medicine. Not sure why it originally went to them, but there is that direct conflict of interest, which they continue to demonstrate through going out into the community and slandering, recommending doctors, and doing things that directly impede the success of the program. There is a single section in the revised statutes that the Department of Public Safety will tell you allows for research in Hawaii, but what they're really talking about is hemp, because as you may have heard, there was the Hawaii Hemp Research Project. This is what they will want you to do before you even apply for the application to grow hemp. 10-foot high chain link fence with barbed wire top, surveillance cameras, security cameras. They have to come out and inspect it before they'll even review your application. If it passes that, then it goes on to the DEA, and they'll probably give you the runaround for 10 years. We do have an Industrial Hemp Day, official Hemp Day, December 14th. So keep that in mind when the holidays come around this year. Some of the results of their crop, which were grown locally, they were able to import seeds from Japan and China, came up with strains that were sustainable in Hawaii, but unfortunately ran into funding and DEA problems and destroyed the entire stock of seeds. We do have a research program here in Hawaii looking at neuroimaging with MRI at the medical school, but they're mostly looking at chronic users. They have a NIH grant trying to show some of the negative effects of chronic use. I don't know the results of that, but there is that facility here. So where do we put Hawaii's program? Well, this is right off the website. Department of Public Safety provides safety of the public and state facilities. I'm not quite sure what that means. Department of Health, they're involved more with health and environmental for all people in Hawaii. But then I was looking at the Department of Human Services, which for me felt like it might be something to consider in the future. I haven't asked them directly if they would consider accepting the program, but they're doing a lot of very humanistic types of things that maybe they would consider. If that fails, let's make a Department of Research. I know of one person who might apply for the job. Barrier number 3, Department of Health. In the revised statute, this is the definition of a debilitating, well, this is part of that definition. I just included the one that applies to the Department of Health because it says any other medical condition approved by DOH pursuant to administrative rules. Okay. Above is the revised statute, below is the administrative rules. The wording is exactly the same. Seems to me that that places the power with the Department of Health. Well, if you write to them and say, I would like to add a condition, you might get something like this back. As enacted provision defined by the Department of Health, contrary to rule-making authority by Chapter 329. I'm not really sure what this means, and something that we may be able to pursue. Barrier number 4, funding. If anybody knows where this tree is, please let me know. I promise I will take very good care of it. Funding for research, but there also needs to be funding for litigation because it's going to be a battle. And I guess in Hawaii, that's part of the way we get things done. We sue people. Just to show you some of the funding from NIH, this is not related to medical cannabis. This is related to animal model research in 2000. These are in millions of dollars being spent on animal model research for different drugs that will probably go on to develop pharmaceutical products. Just to give you the idea of how deep federal funding runs. Our state governments, particularly the NED, which I'm sure is receiving funding from the DEA to help their operations, universities, and even hospitals. If you were at Queens Hospital and you're a cancer patient, the nurse might turn her head the other way, but the official policy by the pharmacy is you're not allowed to use cannabis in the hospital, even if you're a registered patient. So that limits research a little bit. Okay, I'm going to wind up now. Nonprofit research model is probably the direction we need to go. And available study material is also going to be key if we're going to be able to do any studies locally. And that's going to kind of depend on patients being able to identify locally available strains that are out there, that are sustainable, that our patients are using. And again, the ratio between THC and CBD is going to be the key. So one advice to patients would be find strains that work great for their particular condition and preserve those, master those so that other patients can have a source where they can go, and then we can start to figure out which strains are working best for which conditions. And we need a way to analyze them to make sure we know what chemicals are in these different strains, make sure there aren't contaminants, and there are also avenues for that we've been exploring. As doctors, our primary goal is to do no harm, but the best way to do no harm is to stay focused on the patient. The way I see it, the federal government is going to pursue one of two avenues, either outsourcing production overseas when it goes to Schedule II, or only focusing on big pharma therapeutics. My research has also led me to the conclusion that cannabis is a Commonwealth botanical medicine, meaning it already belongs to the people. And so Hawaii state government has taken the first step in allowing patients to reclaim the use of that medicine. I think it still has a way to go, and it has an obligation to make that happen. And I'll leave you this little quote from Benjamin Rush, who I never knew was a founding father, but it sounds like he was a good one. Thanks very much.